Very happy to be back with Keith Chisnall. We're going to carry on where we left off. Hell of a story, Keith, and thanks for coming back to us.
Gosh, I'm humbled, and thank you very much once again to your amazing team that put this together.
Pleasure, Keith. And I'm going to just before you start, I just want to say, a friend of mine, Rob McLean, who you might remember, just listening to our last talk, he sent me a message the other day. So I'm just going to talk a bit about it because it's relevant. And he points out that before the Second World War, the population, the European population of what was then Southern Rhodesia, was 65,000.
Wow. And
of those 65,000, 10,000 volunteered for the war. So that was about 15% of the total population. I mean, it doesn't have any precedent in history, I don't think, where that number of people went off to fight in a foreign war, really.
That's right.
And that's when they had to put a cap on it, because otherwise there were going to be no able-bodied men left in the colony. So that was the extent of the commitment from the white Rhodesians to the cause. And there you have the coronation. And Rob sent me a photograph, which I think John will put up, of the last coronation in 1953, where you guys, the BSAP, were represented. Very smart there in the photograph. Hopefully it'll go up. So there were the BSAP at Queen Elizabeth's coronation, but definitely absent from this one. But, you know, so, I mean, it's just, that's the way things go. Our contribution is well and truly ignored. But another thing that just did come to mind, I didn't watch the whole coronation, but just, you can't fail to notice the whole furor over Prince Harry. And, you know, the story that's not out there really is, but Harry had a very, quite a long, and as far as I can understand, happy love affair with Chelsea, who's from Chelsea Davy, from of Rhodesian provenance. And I gather in his book, which I'll certainly not be reading, he talks very fondly about his time in Africa with the Davy family. But just knowing the Brits as I do, or I think I do, I'm bloody sure that the Foreign Office and the royal household were not terribly excited about Harry possibly marrying a girl with a Rhodesian background. You know, the Foreign Office absolutely loathed us, and I think they still do. The royal household's it's full of lefties, and I think they thought, jeepers, this girl might have a lot going for her, but, you know, with that background tied to Rhodesia, not acceptable. And I think they probably welcomed Meghan Markle when she came wandering into the picture. She kind of fitted the contemporary bill, as it were, being of mixed race, and you know, that all looked a lot more to their liking, and things haven't worked out terribly well for them. So I just that did cross my mind. A lot of it based on supposition, but I think there are a few people at the palace there thinking this might have turned out a lot better with Chelsea. And I wonder if Harry doesn't think the same thing, but we'll probably never know the answer to that. Anyway, that's my little bit of my thoughts for the morning, Keith. When we left it last time, you were on your way building a new camp somewhere in the valley, I think.
Yeah, what it was I joined up with a special branch unit, which was really nicknamed Pachedu, which basically means by ourselves, or you know, all together by ourselves. That's what it meant. It was really to give everybody an identity, that we were a team. And that was in a place just north of Bandura called Retreat Farm. And that was to train the Bishop Muslarewa's
militia
auxiliary forces, which were then called Fumo Revano.
Mm-hmm.
So we set up this, I joined them. That place was already set up, but Ken Stewart was running it. The training camp, we were training on average 500 of these auxiliaries per per intake. But at one stage, the flood of recruits was so vast that we actually had to open up another station, if you like. So Ken asked me to move up the road about 20 kilometers. There was an abandoned farm there, and that's where I set up a new training base. I can't remember the name of the farm for the life of me, but it was about 20 kilometers away, and I had the good services of a chap, also British South Africa police, called Brian Timmer. He was Zulu Scouts liaison special branch. And then another fabulous chap who I often meet up with and reminisce is a chap called Clive Dredge. He was ex-support commander RLI, and he helped with a lot of the mechanical side of things in the new camp that we had. We had to establish a new farm where we could put 500 trainees and also have accommodation and facilities for the instructors that we had. So we had to very quickly make up toilets. We developed a new system for toilets so that we didn't waste water. We had a nice water reservoir at the back, so swimming training was one of the aspects of that program. And the 21 instructors that I had were all trained ex-insurgents under the Muzarewa banner. These were very experienced as far as weaponry was concerned, tactics, and so on. So we built this little training base and continued. And we put about 1,500 auxiliaries through that thing. So only 3 sessions, so it wasn't that long. And after each 500 intake, they would be sent off in trucks to various destinations around the country. Interesting thing about the instructors that we had, the Bishop Muzarewa insurgent instructors, as I say, they were well experienced. They'd been lounging around in foreign territories like Zambia for a number of years and had not been active in insurgent activities in Rhodesia at that time. So they were considered safe. They'd been passed through the little grill system at Special Branch Zulu Scouts, and they were considered fully on sides, and which they were. And we had a good team, and their input and their tenacity, their work that they put into training these auxiliaries was exemplary. So at that time, we were kind of like in the middle of nowhere, and so we had to increase our camp defenses. Clive Dredge, the ex-support commander RLI, very versed in mortars. He took off one day and came back that night with a whole bunch of boxes, in fact, of 60 millimeter mortars. And we had a number of camp defenses. But one of the things which we did there was to increase our defense was deception. There was a little hill behind the main farmhouse where we had our offices and so on. And we knew that if we got attacked, we would be probably outgunned. We would have had auxiliaries running all over the countryside, running away from this, but we would have to defend this lot. So we decided to install a very visible, if you like, large cannon on the top of this hill. So we ripped down one of the side or the corner poles of one of the fence lines, and that's a 75 millimeter pipe. And it's got perfect legs, and we structured this thing. We put an old alginate plastic bottle at the end, painted it black, put it on the top of this hill, and sandbagged it, and it looked like a vicious 75 millimeter cannon. And we were hoping that any potential recce's by the insurgents to come and see whether or not they could take us out would be horrified with the view of this thing on the top of the hill. We would, of course, never be able to get up there because it was impossible. But one of the funniest things we had was we had a camp inspection by the senior special branch chap at that time, chief superintendent. And he took one look at this cannon on top of the hill and went up there, demanded to go up there and see. And he said, "Where's your license for this?" And so on, being very keen on keeping regulations right in the police. And we told him that it was fake, and he couldn't believe it. So even up front and close, he didn't know the difference. anyway, so the training of those former Ravano was intense. We tried our very best to give them all the information that they required to survive and to be out there and do their job properly. Of course, it was very limited in time, and our resources were limited as well. So, on no occasion did we ever train them on radio applications. It would have been a real problem if perhaps the insurgents had got a number of those sets from them and then been able to monitor our systems. So we never trained them on radios. We did train them on medics, and all the training that we did initially was done based on Russian marching procedures, if you like. So it was almost surreal in the fact that we had Russian training with Rhodesian government objectives. It was really weird. So the other thing is that we never trained and we never gave any of them a position. In other words, there was never a leader of a particular squad or anything of that nature. We basically trained them en masse and then sent them on their way. Most of them were active and able, but there were many that weren't. So most of those that weren't were put onto kitchen duties and stuff like that. I don't know whether or not they stayed on in former Ravana, but we tried our best. So one of the funny things about that particular thing, to keep the morale high in that camp, because the training was very physical, and we had a game which I think you're probably familiar with called murder ball, but we didn't have a ball. So we used 2 military water bottles, filled them up with sand, and then threw them in the middle of this game. There was 250 men per side, and the objective was to get that water bottle and touch a pole on the other side on this big field that we had in front of the farmhouse. The injuries that took place and happened at that thing, it meant that we were in trouble. So everybody was piling onto this ball, and so-called ball, and it was almost strangulation. So we decided we were going to put a big telephone pole, which was probably about 7 meters in length, and use that as instead of the ball. And one of the teams grabbed this pole and just bulldozed their way through the other side. So again, injuries were heavy. So we had to stop murder ball. So that was the end of that game.
But Keith, where did Charlie Small fit into the picture there?
Yeah, what happened was, he pitched up one day. Charlie with his whole team, he had a bunch of Land Rovers, and they pitched up one day out of the blue. And our good friend Tiens Elof, who was Zulu Scouts, he knew him very well. And the funny thing about Charlie was when he pitched up, he was in engineers, and one of the most amazingly brave, very clever engineer that served tremendous battles outside of Rhodesia. But as he pitched up to the camp, Tiens Elof decided that he's not leaving, so he shot all his tires out. And of course, Chris was not too impressed with that. And I remember the next day, Tiens was gun mad. He loved his guns. He had a favorite weapon which had a beautiful scope on it. And funnily enough, he was on the toilet, and he went to the toilet with his gun, and he was busy cleaning his scope with toilet paper, I guess. Anyway, this bomb came through the window from Chris Small, threw it into the toilet, and to pay back this treachery that Tiens had done on him. So this thing was actually a thunder flash. But what had happened was Chris had removed all the explosives, and it was just this fuse that went off. But Tiens took off out of that toilet at high speed, dropped his rifle, and ran like hell because he thought it was a bunker bomb, which was a kilogram of explosives. And so Chris got his payback. So we had a visit by a number of people onto the premises. Some of them were real characters. We had a visit by our then Prime Minister, Bishop was Abel Muzorewa, in what was then Zimbabwe Rhodesia. I was on leave at the time, and he just decided to pitch up. So from a retreat farm, which was 20 kilometers away, they drove up in convoy up this dirt road that was coming to our little place, and he was in the lead vehicle. It was a Land Rover, and the vehicle behind was actually our heavy vehicle. It was a Bedford 5-tonner, and that was carrying troops and also supplies for our auxiliaries. And that particular vehicle hit a landmine. So Muzorewa had missed that landmine by inches.
Sure.
And that vehicle was okay. The heavy vehicle was okay because we used to fill the tires with water, about 3/4 of the way up with water to help dull, if you like, the impact of a landmine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the vehicle was non-operational thereafter. But when Muzorewa pitched up at the camp, he was all jitters and shaking and so on.
Mm.
So I had a Batman at the time called Kenneth, and he thought, well, the best thing for the bishop was to give him a cup of tea. And so he asked him, would you like some tea? And he said, yes, yes, please. And he said, how many sugar? And he said, well, if it's a small cup, give me 3. And if it's a large cup, give me 9. So all those auxiliaries from there onwards called him 30 Romeo 9, which meant 3 or 9. And that was what took place. And he, in fact, insisted that he wasn't going to come out from that place by vehicle. So a helicopter had to come and fly in from Salisbury, pick him up and take their lot out. So that was the story of Muzorewa.
Keith, you had the Zambia battle story. Tell us about that.
What happened was that the instructors that we had, which were part of Bishop Muzorewa's team, was in fact stationed in Zambia, and we got to speak to these instructors and find out what was going on external, in other words, in Zambia. And they told us stories which were amazing. They told us about how there were battles between the various factions in Zambia, and that the Zambian police had to try and get in between them and stop them from fighting. They were causing mayhem. Within the ZANU, or Zanla, actually, armed forces, was a woman. Her name was She-Bitch, and she stood out in the middle of this field between the two fighting groups and was yelling and screaming and egging on the Zanla guys, and the Zambians just shot her stone dead. So that actually stopped a lot of incursions from the northern borders for a good period of time. And it put a lot of bad vibes between the various fighting factions of the terrorists, if you like. So it did affect Rhodesia. It meant that we weren't being attacked so much for a period of time. But it also, in the long term, meant that Zanla and Zipra really weren't good friends.
No,
right down to the base troopy.
That's right. There was massive rivalry. And then you mentioned something in your book about the pigs, the 2 pigs.
Yeah, we had 2 pigs there. One big male. He must have been up to the side of a car. He was so big, and we named him Cyrus after Cyrus Vance from America. And then his mate, who was female, not so big as Cyrus, but she was called Devona, and that was after David Owen, because we really liked those two people. But Cyrus was loved by our cook. His name was Moses, and Moses used to feed Cyrus a loaf of bread every morning, and that was his joy. Cyrus would come and stand at the back of the kitchen and wait for his loaf of bread. And one day, Ken Stewart, our boss, together with Chintz, were actually taking 6 of the Fumarovano, or auxiliaries, by Land Rover back to the Selous Scouts fort in Bandura for interrogation. Basically, what had happened was that we had suspected that there was an internal group that was against us. So they were transporting them back to Bandura to see the Selous Scouts fort. Anyway, on the way, they got ambushed, and Ken and Tiens managed to bail out the vehicle and open fire. But all 6 of those guys were taken out in the back of the vehicle. They had no clue what to do. They just sat in the back of the vehicle waiting for something, and they just got killed. So my vehicle was written off. They were using my Land Rover. Anyway, when those bodies were brought back to the camp, unfortunately, Cyrus decided that being an omnivore, that he was going to have a go at one of these bodies in the back of the vehicle. And Moses, the cook, took one look at this, and that was the end of that, because Cyrus was busy munching on one of their bodies, so he wasn't too impressed.
Keith, at this stage, you were closer to concession on the cars farm.
Yeah, we going forward a little bit. At one stage we realized, well, we were instructed basically that the number of auxiliaries was sufficient. So the training now ceased. So having done about 2,500 of these auxiliaries and put them out into the field, we closed down the training camps, and we moved with all our weapons. I'm talking about the base team of Pachedu, the special branch group. And we set up a safe house in a place called Borrowdale, which is in the northern quarter of Salisbury. And this safe house became the center for our operations thereafter, because we went basically operational. We had no job training anymore, so what are we going to do? So again, working under special branch, but this time Salisbury, we were then tasked with various things, and we did a lot of operations around the country. We endeavored to find the Zipper terrorist called Nylon, who killed 5 Zulu scouts way down in the south near Fort Victoria, and we were unable to do that, but we had a lot of action, again, also all in pseudo. Basically, we were pseudo operators. At this time, we had a number of Zipper people with us, so we operated in areas where Zipper terrorists were, and also we had Zanla, so we operated in those areas. So for a good period of time, we were a reaction force, a little bit livened up reaction force compared to my SIS days. At that stage, we also had the good fortune to have a number of very experienced soldiers come and join us, including people like Ian Suttle, Jake Harper-Arnold, Gary Lewis, Yanni Meyer. They all joined us, ex-Zulu Scouts, ex-SAS. And they were basically the backbone or support team that was the killer force, if you like. When we went in, we were primarily involved in intelligence gathering, although we did fight a lot. My one team was called Alpha Charlie, and then the second team was run very well with a giant of a man and a very good friend of mine called Jerry Webster, who ran the other team, the operational team. We often worked together in the same area, but not close to each other. We operated and try and infiltrate a particular area to do our tasks. And then, of course, the support team of those soldiers would support us. So we would move in mass, take up a position, and then, let's say in a tribal trust land, and then operate from there and take over that whole area. We had a lot of weaponry, all the stuff that we had taken from our training days, our cannons, we had I don't know if how to pronounce it, but the 12.5 by 108 millimeter disc Russian machine gun. We had that mounted on a vehicle and so on. So a lot of weaponry, which we used to go around. We used to deceive a lot of people as well by, if we went in convoy, we would drag all our trailers and put pipes on them and cover them with canvas with tires on the side to look like cannons, look like we were an armed force of magnificent standing. But in fact, it was all misdirection, really, to impress the locals. So, that's what we did. So when one of our operations, so this was coming very close to the end of the war. It was about a week before the ceasefire had been signed at Lancaster House in London. And what took place is that we were really hell-bent on getting a particular group that was situated in an area called Concession, which was northwest of Salisbury, but they were very close to Salisbury. So we had the idea that we were going to take this lot out. Anyway, so we went past an internal affairs bar one day, and we stole their flag, and we raised that when we took possession of a manager's farmhouse on this farm run by the Kerrs in Concession, and we raised the internal affairs flag. hoping that the terrorists would think that we were of no military consequence, so they would be able to hang around and so on and not worry about us. So we dressed in civilians, and only at night time, or when we went on operations, we were dressed in our full military kit, which was primarily pseudo stuff. Anyway, this group obviously were taken by this ruse, and they hung around. So we hammered them for every night for the 7 days until ceasefire, and they decided, no, we're going to get back. So I had a contact the night before ceasefire, and then I decided to walk out back to the camp. It was not far. It was about 5 or 7 kilometers. I can't remember the distance, but it was not too far. And so not Tiens, my apologies. My team were with me, but then Jerry Webster and all the other guys, they piled into a Land Rover and went to react to this contact to go and see what they could find. And on the way out, they hit a landmine. And that landmine was shocking. All were injured. Jerry Webster had an injury to his left leg, which, according to the surgeon, said that it's the worst he'd ever seen. His leg had been pushed right up past his knee, so it ended up like that. Billy Grant ended up underneath the vehicle, and in fact, Ian Suttle and those guys, all with broken limbs and this, that, and the other, lifted that vehicle off Billy. And I managed to get there a few minutes after and try and help with all the casualties. But they were brave guys. They just took it in stand. Ian Suttle was standing there with broken ribs and this, that, and the other. And he just stood up and he said, right, let's go and find them. He was so aggressive. I think he was shot several times when he was in SAS. What a tough guy. So that was a story. That was on ceasefire day, exactly at 7 o'clock in the morning when the ceasefire was supposed to take place. That's when the landmine occurred. So that was the end of the operational side of Pachedu. And then of course ceasefire came about, and we were told to stand down and get back to our safe house.
Keith, was Roy Bennett involved at all with any of your?
Roy I knew well, but Roy actually was part of the British South Africa Police. I knew that I don't know his full story on operations, but I know that he was part of the Special Investigation Section, SIS, which I was a unit, part of one of the units I worked with. So Roy was one of those, but he spoke Shona fluently, and he was very, very good at intelligence gatherings, which was what we were supposed to do in SIS.
I'm sure.
So Roy was there, yeah.
Keith, you mentioned ObZebra. What?
What happened was that with ceasefire coming about, all the insurgents were now being forced to, that was the story, was that they were supposed to be put into these temporary camps, assembly points, where they would be housed and kept out of the system. But of course, many of them didn't. But this was a very difficult time. During the period when ceasefire started to when the elections took place, there was a very troubled time in Rhodesia. We as Pachedu was Special Branch Operational Unit under ADISC. Special Branch didn't really have any real good idea of what our goals were. We had no direction. We couldn't fight anybody, so we got up to nonsense. And what happened was that there was a number of volunteers, and purely there was only 2 members of senior Special Branch that knew and were aware of this operation, and they initiated it. And they looked for volunteers, not openly, but covertly. We got invited into the team, if you like. There were essentially 2 teams, one which was based in Bulawayo area and one which was where we were in Salisbury. I was part of that team. We did a number of things. The objective of that particular, can I call it a third force, was that we would try and limit the exposure of the various groups such as Zanla and Zipra to the masses. One of the things that we did was when Joshua Nkomo came back into the country, he was due to go down from Salisbury to Bulawayo by train. Sorry, I got that wrong. He was supposed to go down to Bulawayo. We decided that half the people that were coming from Salisbury that were going down to Bulawayo by train were going to be going to his first public meeting. And so we wanted to limit the number of people that were going to that particular venue. So we decided to go and blow up the railway line. And again, this is all volunteer work. We managed to get a number of facilities. We got a safe house where we did training, indoor training for house raids and stuff like that, improve on our weapons handling, do our strategies, all that stuff. We were all well experienced in the art of war, but we needed to work more as a team. So we did a lot of training before we went operational, if you like, and it was all clandestine. We had vehicles which were not licensed, really, fake number plates, that type of thing. And we did a number of things. But as I say, the blowing up of the railway line near Hartley was one of the things that we did. And that was a very worrying time. We put the landmine, I dug a hole, I put the landmine, a TM-46 Russian, and tried everything in our way to make sure that all the parts of that explosion were Russian origin. So fuses and stuff, I only had about 2.5 feet of fuse. So I cut that in half, and I cut off a few centimeters and tested the speed with time. So we knew more or less how much time we had to get away. But, you couldn't trust that fuse because it was Russian. It was quite old as well. So anyway, blew up the railway line. But when we came back, we didn't hear the explosion. So when we came back just to see what had happened, I went to the hole, and this was dead at night, and looked up, and there was this bright light, and this train was coming down towards us. And I had this vision that we were going to get flattened by this train as it derailed. But, it actually passed over that big hole. It went straight over and stopped a few kilometers down the road. A few years later, I actually met that train driver, and he said it was the worst bump he'd ever had. But that was Operation Zebra. It was a clandestine third-party kind of
You try and frustrate the political process. And
correct, yeah. It was really to try and minimize the impact of the Zanla and Zipra
homecoming
and the visibility. Yeah.
And then the election, you stayed on.
Yeah, what happened was that when the election results were announced, of course, everybody was horrified and shocked on the Rhodesian government side that we had been overridden by Zanla or Mugabe's group. And so we had to now close up shop, if you like. And we were instructed by Ken Stewart to get rid of everything that we had. We didn't want anybody, the victors, to get access to anything that we'd done, or I think not that we'd done anything wrong. We had, we were not vicious. We had not done criminal acts and this, that, the other. It was all part of war, and so we never did anything wrong. So it was kind of like a strange instruction, but anyway, we did what we did. So all the videos and pictures and maps and you name it, we put it in a huge bonfire and set it alight, and that was the end of that. So that was the elections, and we then disbanded Pachedu, and that was the end of our operations, basically. And then from there, I was now transferred to Special Branch Chirundu, which is on the far north side of the country. Its road goes across the bridge into Zambia, and my job was really to operate that little port, if you like. And the job entailed primarily to do with intelligence, and when the Zipra people were coming from Zambia into Rhodesia, or Zimbabwe Rhodesia at that time, to monitor the equipment that was coming in and to make notes and find out who's who and so on. So you met all the leaders that were coming through. They had to stop there, and we discussed things and told them where to go and so on. So a lot of that was done by us in Special Branch in Chirundu. But also I helped with a number of normal petty crime stuff, like arresting people with fake American dollars coming from the Congo. When the that ceasefire was taking place, there was a lot of people coming from Africa, taking advantage of the unsettled situation in the country. So they were bringing in fake this, that, and the next thing, a lot of smuggling going on. So we had to nail these guys as best as we could. So that was the Chirundu operation. It was great fun on the river, of course. But then that was when the first time I'd ever used a fax machine. It was the weirdest thing ever. We were issued this fax machine, which basically was a roll like this, and then you'd put your piece of A4 paper sideways into it. You'd phone Special Branch headquarters in Salisbury from Chirundu, and the lines in those days, telephone lines, were terrible. If there was a thunderstorm halfway across, the crackle of that lightning would affect the quality of the sound of the fax and so on, receiving it. So you'd put the paper in sideways, and you'd tell the guy on the other side, okay, I'm sending this A4 document, and you push start, and he pushes start, and this machine goes round at high speed and then starts imprinting the lettering on the side, and then it's all printed sideways, if you like. But because of the lightning possibility all the way down on the telephone line, it would sometimes come out on the other side illegible. So after trying 4 or 5 times, you eventually say, well, I'm not interested anymore. I'm going to tell you on the phone. So it was not as though it was secret. It was supposed to be a secret system, but you got so frustrated. So, yeah, so that was SB Chirundu. From there,
no,
carry on.
No, you carry on. From there, you go to Harare.
So I was transferred back to Harare, and I was positioned in Special Branch Airport. Now, that was, as you arrive into the airport on arrivals, if you look left, there was a door. That was my office. And we would then monitor incoming passengers and also outgoing passengers. So anybody coming in, we'd get information generally from the passenger list from the aircraft, and we'd have to very quickly go down through this and see if we can pick up any names which were on our watch list. We had a book basically with names. So anybody that came in there that was really potentially against us, we would then start to monitor, and we would get that information to headquarters and or follow these characters out after they'd arrived. So we had a lot of liaison with the CIA at the time. They would often come with information very quickly to tell us that a particular group or an individual is arriving in the country. Be aware. For example, there was a Cuban that arrived there. He was the first man to openly have a handgun in the United Nations, and so we monitored him. We also had the job of searching luggage, so we had to do a locksmith's course, and in the guts, if you like, of the airport was another office which contained banks of keys, lock-picking devices, and so on. So if the Cubans or the Russians left the country, and when they put their bags through the system, we would then grab that and then try and put it through our very, very slow photocopying machine and try and copy as much documentation as possible. Then relock the bag and let it go, because the guys would come and say, come on, you've got to hurry up because the plane's leaving, and so we've got to get the bag and run it back up onto the aircraft so they can get away, and we've got our information. Sometimes it was impossible to get all the information, but we did get quite a bit from that. So again, working with CIO and Special Branch and CIA, we kind of like put this package together to monitor these people. From there, I didn't spend too much time at the airport, but I was moved to town and then ran from Red Bricks. That was our main office in Special Branch. And we did various things, including getting information from various informers around the country. But one of the aspects that we also got involved with was the monitoring of Russian and Cuban embassies. And that was interesting. We'd been given some equipment, and that equipment had been installed in those embassies prior to the occupants taking possession of them. So, for example, in the Russian embassy, there were windowsills, and we would then dig underneath that, put sound activated listening devices in those. And then just across the street from there was a flat which we rented, and we would monitor on a 24-hour basis the conversations taking place in those rooms. But the Russians weren't stupid. They knew that that was thing, and you'd often see them walking outside having their meetings. So they knew that they were being bugged. But anyway, and I'm sure that they gave a lot of false information to us. So all those tapes on the old big tapes had to be then taken and translated, and then the information acted upon. There was a time when the CIA got in touch with us and said, listen, there's 2 KGB guys coming in. One was, I think, in charge of KGB Africa. And anyway, they pitched up and they were staying at the Meikles Hotel. What took place was that the Special Branch, together with CIA, took up residence right next door, in a room next door to the Russians. And then our job, the runners, if you like, was to monitor their movement once they left the hotel. So CIA and our Special Branch guys would monitor them in the hotel, and then as soon as they left, we would then have to be on their tail. And I remember an incident where they set us up, these Russians. They were so much more advanced than we were. We were absolute amateurs. And these 2 Russians walked out. One was carrying a briefcase, and everybody's gone on the radio saying he's got a briefcase, maybe he's got information and so on. So we had a team of about 12 guys that were activated. So they walked from the hotel down into town. So as they went down, we've got these civilians like us now, both black and white, working together, running around. There's a number of radios, handheld radios, but every radio that we had was quite big. So in order to conceal this and to be able to communicate, we would wrap that in a newspaper. So all the guys running around with a newspaper, talking to the newspaper, would be obviously part of the group, So as they walk down, if you come down a street, you'll see there's, let's say, Barter Shoe Company. They've got a window, and around the other side is another window. So what they do is that they walk down, turn the corner, and then look back, and they would be able to see all these idiots who we were running down, trying to catch up to them. And so they identified all of us, and they went into a little restaurant. So we sent in a girl with no newspaper, and she went and she sat quite close to them and tried to see what she could get from them. But what happened was that the guy with the briefcase, he then put the briefcase down, pushed it with his foot to the other guy, and the other guy picked up the briefcase. And as they came out the restaurant, they split. And of course, we were in panic because we thought, now there's a problem. We got to follow. Who do we follow? And it was a complete mess. So that was typical of what took place at that time.
But Keith, I'm just trying to figure out why the new government was so keen to have these people under surveillance, because the Soviets and the Cubans were obviously very much on the side of the new government. Was this American pressure at the time, or I just wonder what the thinking was?
Yeah, I was not involved in any other operations, if you like. For example, let's say monitoring the South Africans or monitoring the Americans. We never did that. And what's weird is that in that transition, we still had the flavor, if you like, of considering, and I'm talking specifically about Special Branch, of monitoring the communist bloc as opposed to the Western. So it was quite strange that we didn't have, well, not in our section, operations against the Western bloc at that time. But yes, you're right. The Russians and Cubans were considered friends by the Mugabe regime. And it wasn't at that time that they had taken possession, if you like, of Special Branch. So our direction really was against communism until we had further instructions. So that's what we did.
And then, Keith, there was the arrest of some of the Special Branch guys.
That was a shocking time. It was on the 1st of January 1980. Right at the top of what we call Red Bricks was where Special Branch headquarters was. I pitched up there. There's a big grill. That's where you've got to go through and to get into the offices. and there's always a guard there to make sure that you've got to identify yourself. But as I pitched up the stairs and got to the top there was a whole bunch of armed policemen up there, and they said, identify yourself. So we had to do that. Right, go inside. And when we got inside, there was a whole lot more people, which we didn't know who they were. They shouldn't have been allowed in there. But anyway, they were all armed. And then as you walk down the passageway, there was all the offices that we would have had where we operated from. And in each office was an armed guard and so on. And then they started the process. They told you, sit down, started a process of questions and this, that, and the other, interrogations. They accused me of being part of a foreign spy ring. My name was Goofy in amongst the slot, but how they got that name, I don't know. But what happened was that they were looking for information, and they were looking, like that, for example, were special branch individuals involved in foreign activities, for example, in Bureau of State Security, South African intelligence. Were they involved with that? We weren't. We had nothing to do with it. But they decided that they were going to look for various other bits of information. And they then went with each individual, and went back to their homes and started to search their homes. And there were three of the guys, J. Copper Arnold, who was ex-Zulu Scouts and British Para. He had weapons at home. And so did Phil Hartlebury and Colin Evans. They all had weapons at home. And then, of course, most of us did, but they were caught, and they were jailed for life, really, in solitary confinement. They did manage to get out eventually, but it must have been terrifying and terrible. I mean, for us, it was really unnerving. So we had to shut up, and just then we realized, who can you trust? We knew, for example, that we could trust ourselves, people like all the operators and so on. But the rest, we didn't know where we were. So those three were arrested, and it was a very unnerving time.
I'm sure.
And it was then that I decided, no, this has now got too far. And I mean, it was very worrying. You were worried that your property was being, or your flat where you were staying, or your house was being monitored. So do extensive searches. You didn't know who to trust. It was a very unsettling time. So I decided, no, it's time to leave the country. And funnily enough, I was at the airport seeing a friend off, and there was a gentleman trying to put some dog food into the back of his car, having just arrived into the country from wherever. And he was struggling. So I went and I just threw the stuff in the back for him. And he said, thank you very much. Can I have your name and telephone number? And then I said, no, it's because I didn't know who to trust. Anyway, eventually I gave it to him. And then 8 o'clock the next morning, he phoned me and he said, come to my offices, which was, he was the manager of TAP, Transportes Aéreos Portuguese, which was the Portuguese airlines.
Yes.
And he said, I don't know where this came from. He said, I know you need to sort your problems out. Here's a ticket anywhere in the world where TAP flies. And he gave me and he said, where do you want to go? I said, I don't know. I have no clue. So I said, let's try England. And he gave me a ticket to London. And I had to very quickly go down to MI6 and see if I could get a stamp in my passport to be able to get into London, which I did. And that's when I left the country.
Yes, Keith.
Yeah.
What a story. Well, you certainly did your bit. You certainly tried. Didn't work out, but what a hell of a story. Keith, is there anything that we've gone through that we haven't, that you haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
No, not off the top. There's obviously a great deal of stuff that we, in this limited time that we have on the interviews, to talk about, but there's a lot more in the book that I made called Watch My Tracer. But what I wanted to say, Hannes, is that the people of Rhodesia were very special, and I just wanted to say that, my ashes will be buried elsewhere, but in the early morning sunrise each day, all I know is, with conviction, is that I lived and I laughed and I fought alongside Rhodesians, some of the finest and bravest people I've ever known, both black and white.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, Keith.
Thank you.
Salute, bless you, and
Thank you.
thank you for your time.
Very kind indeed for giving me the privilege and honor of doing this. Appreciate it. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Hannes.
Cheers, Keith.
Bye-bye.